Hello guys, it's Mr. Sexton again, and we are going to be talking today, of course, about Chapter 4 as we're getting into the fifth day of class for this semester. Chapter 4 is going to deal with civil liberties, but before we get into that conversation about the chapter, I want to encourage you to watch this video to its conclusion today because towards the end of this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the exam that we have coming up this weekend. So, after watching the video, if you have any questions about the material for this chapter or for the exam, make sure you contact me as soon as you can. Now, the chapter that we're going to be talking about, dealing with civil liberties, is going to look at civil liberties as they apply both originally when the Constitution was written and then later on when we make the amendments and then when those amendments are what we call applied to the states. So as you're reading this chapter, the first thing you need to do is make sure you get a good solid definition of what a civil liberty is. Because a lot of people will get confused between what a civil liberty is and what a civil right is. So make sure you have that clarity. Now, we're also going to look in this chapter at the civil liberties that are found in the Constitution itself. There are a very limited number of civil liberties that are addressed in the body of the Constitution. Be familiar with those. Things such as habeas corpus, ex post facto laws, bills of attainder. Very few of these civil liberties are addressed in the body of the Constitution, but be familiar with which ones are. Now, then you're going to have to take a look at the Bill of Rights, which all of you should be aware are the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So civil liberties were not extensively discussed in the body of the Constitution. We had to amend the Constitution to find most of these civil liberties that we have today being addressed. Be familiar with those civil liberties that are addressed in the body of the Constitution as opposed to those that are addressed in the Bill of Rights. Now, something else you're going to need to have to pick up from this chapter is who the Bill of Rights applies to. Originally, the Bill of Rights applies only to the national government. You need to understand that concept. You need to make sure you take from the chapter an understanding as to why the Bill of Rights originally only applied to the national government. Then, after the Civil War, after some things happened in our history, specifically the passage of the 14th Amendment, the Bill of Rights is then applied to the states. That process is known as selective incorporation. Make sure you have an understanding of how selective incorporation operated. Understand that as we go through the Bill of Rights, we can pick a year and in most cases a specific court case that selectively incorporated or applied that particular liberty to the states, therefore requiring not only the national government to protect that liberty, but also the states. Make sure you're going through the chapter and highlighting and understanding the year and the court case that applied each of the rights that we find in the Bill of Rights to the states. Okay? After you get through that conversation and that section of the textbook chapter that deals with applying the Bill of Rights to the states, make sure you're able to go through and understand the major concepts around the First Amendment, particularly freedom of religion, and then freedom of speech, freedom of press. Make sure you understand how the Bill of Rights or the First Amendment addresses, or the courts have addressed, the issue of obscenity. And then, of course, there's going to be a short section in the textbook that talks about the Second Amendment, which we all know is our right to bear arms. Make sure you understand the court cases that have been argued before the Supreme Court within the previous, 10 years. This Second Amendment has just recently really been clarified by the Supreme Court. Make sure you're aware of that and familiar with those court cases. Then a large part of this chapter deals with the Fourth through the Eighth Amendments, which deals with the rights of the criminally accused. Now, make sure you're familiar with, in general terms, what each of the Fourth through the Eighth Amendments deal with. For example, Fourth Amendment deals with issues like illegal search and seizure, the exclusionary rule, things of that nature. Fifth Amendment deals with issues like self-incrimination. We're all familiar with Law and Order, where the police officer arrests somebody and they says you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney if you cannot afford an attorney. That's called your Miranda rights or your Miranda warnings. Make sure you're familiar with that. As you go through each of the liberties that we find in the Fourth through the Eighth Amendment, make sure you're familiar with, in general, what does the Fourth Amendment deal with? What does the Eighth Amendment deal with? Okay? Then, after you look at that, there's a concept here in the chapter that you need to really have a strong understanding of, and that is the idea of due process of the law. The Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment guarantees all citizens due process of the law. Make sure you understand what due process is, because it really goes a long way to understanding how we protect our civil liberties in this country. Then the last thing in the chapter that they touch on that you need to be familiar with is the right to privacy. We bring up this issue of the right to privacy in this chapter because the Bill of Rights nor the Constitution explicitly say you have a right to privacy. There's some language in the Fourth Amendment that the Supreme Court has interpreted to state that we have a right to privacy. And those rights to privacy deal with things like, your sexual orientation. It deals with birth control. It deals with the issue of abortion. It deals with the issue of pornography. Lots of things fall under this umbrella. Okay? So make sure that you're understanding where in the 14th or the 4th, in the 4th Amendment, this issue of the right to privacy has been interpreted by the Supreme Court. Now, the last thing that I want to touch on in today's daily video is the exam. The exam is going to open at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, and you will have to complete it by midnight Sunday night. So you'll actually have almost 2 days to choose when you want to take the exam. The thing to realize about the exam is that the exam, while you'll be open for almost 2 days, you will only have 1 hour to complete the exam. Once you open the exam, you only have 1 hour to complete it. If you want to have the full hour to take the exam, you need to start it at least an hour before it closes on Sunday evening, because at midnight on Sunday, Moodle is going to close down the exam even if you're in the middle of taking it. So make sure that you are giving yourself enough time to take the exam. Other thing that you need to keep in mind about the exam is that the vast majority of the information on the exam is going to come from textbook reading, the stuff that we've talked about in these videos. Okay? But understand that you also had that video that you had to come watch, the one dealing with the Madisonian model. And you also had an assignment that was due yesterday entitled, How Many Senators Do I Have? Those two activities are also fair game for the exam. The exam is going to be made up mostly of true, false, and multiple choice questions. There might be a couple of fill-in-the-blank short answer questions, and that information is going to come primarily, or those questions are going to come primarily from the assignment that we had and the videos that you had to watch dealing with the Madisonian model. Not entirely, but that's where most of those questions are going to be found in the exam. Okay? My suggestion in studying for the exam, there's lots of material on here. As you know, we covered 4 chapters this week for this first exam. My suggestion for you is to make sure you've read the chapter, that you've also gone through and looked at the study guide that's provided for you at the end of each chapter. Again, your questions are not going to be just simply what is the exclusionary rule and here's the exact definition that was in the textbook. You're going to be asked some questions that are going to require you to do a little bit of interpretation of what you read in the textbook. Okay? Make sure you are contacting me in plenty of time if you have any questions about what's going on. Especially important for this exam period is that you call me on my cell phone if you have questions. It's a weekend. I'm going to be shopping for Christmas and doing those other things with my family. So please, if you have issues, if you have technical problems, make sure you're calling me as soon as the problem arises. Okay? Good luck on today's materials and good luck on the exam. And I know each one of you are capable of doing well on this exam. So good luck and give me a call if you have any questions at all.